So the question we've all been scratching our heads about may have been answered by a channel called Behind Criminal Minds. Why wasn't Nicole Kessinger investigated? Like you or I would have been, especially in such a high-profile case. Behind Criminal Minds has been working on a series touching on different topics of the Watts case. A lot of people were chasing conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are born when facts are swept under the rug, because those with the answers weren't being very honest. Welcome back. Please like and subscribe as we delve into an interesting revelation discovered by the channel Behind Criminal Minds. On YouTube was threatened a copyright strike on his channel by D.A. Rourke's wife and unfairly accused the channel of defaming her guest and husband, Michael J. Rourke. Behind Criminal Minds took the video down, was unfairly hit with a copyright strike. Now looking into this very telling video titled Chris Watts, A Deal with the Devil in Search of Justice. Everything checks out. Most of the information comes from District Attorney Michael J. Rourke himself when his wife interviews him on her podcast called Survivor's Guide to True Crime. On Chapter 11, titled Prosecutorial Vicarious Trauma with the Honorable Michael J. Rourke. Michael J. Rourke is the elected District Attorney for the 19th Judicial District in Weld County, Colorado. He served as the Assistant District Attorney for 7 years before being appointed to District Attorney in 2015. Since then, he's been re-elected twice, most recently in 2020. Michael is a lifelong Colorado resident, attended Chatfield High School, the University of Colorado at Boulder, and the University of Denver College of Law. He started his prosecution career in 1997 after receiving his Juris Doctor degree. Michael started as a deputy district attorney in the 18th Judicial District before moving to Weld County in 2005. During his career, Michael has prosecuted numerous high-profile cases, including first-degree murder, SA, crimes against children, and crimes of violence. Michael has received several prestigious awards during his prosecution career, including the Colorado District Attorney's Council Robert R. Gallagher Prosecutor of the Year Award and the Criminal Justice Award of the Colorado Organization for Victims Assistance. He is a nationally recognized speaker who has presented for Ending Violence Against Women International, the International Homicide Investigators Association, and the Colorado District Attorney's Council. Michael is currently the Colorado State Director to the National District Attorneys Association Board of Directors. He has also served as a former president of the Colorado District Attorney Council Governing Board, where he is a current member. He is a proud husband to wife Kimberly and a proud father to their 4 children. He resides in Weld County and is an active member of the community where he serves on numerous community boards and commissions. Impressive.
He was in the process of a separation from his wife, and as far as I knew, that was becoming pretty finalized.
The core of her deceptions is based on Nicole's first lie, directed on the status of Shanann and Chris's marriage. Lying to investigators about believing Chris and Shanann's divorce was almost finalized was easy to expose when investigators analyze her phone, showing and proving she is blatantly lying in her Google searches 3 weeks prior. One lie always leads to another when you're trying to hide something, and this was just the beginning for Nicole Kessinger.
Monday afternoon, he told me that she was gone and he didn't know where she was. And at that point, I don't think that it set off any alarms in my head, just because, I have friends that I text, and if I don't hear from them for 3 hours or 6 hours or even a couple days, I don't feel concerned about where they're at, because it's kind of a standard thing for me.
On the 13th of August, 2018, the same day Shanann goes missing, Kessinger states not being concerned about Shanann and the kids.
This was all on Monday. I legitimately thought this woman left the premises with her kids and just wanted nothing to do with him for 24 hours.
We all know interrogations go nothing like what we witnessed with Nicole. which is exactly why we have more questions. The channel touched on all of NK's inconsistencies and the unusual response of investigators.
Oh, and like I kept telling him I was scared. I was really freaking scared. In fact, that's another thing I miss. See, I'm so tired. Monday night, like, I called him back in the middle of the night because I could not sleep. I could not sleep at all. And I remember when I called him, he sounded like he was sleeping. And I was like, how the hell can you sleep right now? I think that's exactly what I said to him. And he was just like, I'm just kind of dozing off and on the couch. And I just remember thinking, like, I haven't shut my eyes yet. And this is not even my family. And so that happened on Monday night.
Yeah, well, all those phone calls at the very end of the night, that was me freaking out. Like, if you look at my text, a lot of that was like, I can't sleep, I'm really scared, where's your family? That was like me freaking out and him calling to like try to reassure me, or me calling him like, please talk to me, I'm super scared, where's your family? Like, those little ones at the very end of the night are me not being able to sleep and trying to get him to like talk to me about like, and just, I guess, making sure everything was okay. So that those like real late ones, and that's why they're all kind of like sporadic. Cause I'd be up for like an hour, and then I'd fall asleep for like 15 minutes, and then I would like wake up and start stressing again and try to call him back. Like, so that's why there are all these like little sporadic ones throughout the end of the night. But those two big ones.
Nicole's ability to turn it on and off says a lot about her character. She contradicts herself many times, claiming not to remember or just flat out lying. Detective Michael Prill's data report proves NK was full of it and needed further investigation as to her motive for lying. We aren't detectives, nor are we junior detective wannabes, as Mr. Rourke puts it, and still common sense would have told me or anyone else maybe we need to look further into Nicole. She may or may not have some level of involvement, but we really need to dig into her a bit. Why would she lie to us? A thorough investigation isn't a lot to ask for, even though Chris Watts confessed the lies and deceptive behavior by the mistress of a man who just annihilated his pregnant wife and 2 daughters should have made her a suspect.
What he believed law enforcement did wrong with regard to their handling of Nicole Kessinger.
There were multiple things that caught my attention as an investigator and one who conducted hundreds of interview interrogations. Some of the things that really got my attention was her father being in the room, and the fact that he ended up dominating that interview process.
Agreed. That was my sentiment as well. So based on your experience as a seasoned detective, have you personally ever seen an adult witness this closely connected to the perpetrator, someone who had not yet been cleared by law enforcement, be allowed to bring their father who proceeds to dominate important parts of this interview? Is that something you have personally ever seen or witnessed?
No, that is not something that we would normally see. In general, we want to talk to a witness by themselves so they're not being influenced one way or another. And with her father directing the investigator of how the investigation was going to be conducted was very alarming to me.
Alarming is something of an understatement, which leads me to my next question. Had you been in that position and not Detective Kobach, would you have immediately dealt with the problem of her father continually interrupting the interview and intervened in some way?
It was the investigator's option to redirect and or counter at that time and or reschedule an interview without the father present.
Okay, so it would have been advantageous for law enforcement to have stopped the interview and either rescheduled it or asked Dwayne Kessinger to leave. Which brings up an important follow-up question. Was there anything in your observations of Nicole Kessinger's mannerisms during the interview that stood out to you in light of your prior experience?
When we look at an interview and or an interrogation, we're taking the total picture of everything that's going on in front of us. We're looking at their their body mannerisms? Are they clenching their hands in front of them to close off? Are they being open, keeping their hands open and responding in a normal cadence or a normal timely fashion to answer? Or the opposite? Are they being very difficult and to get any response out of them? The response of them being vague and needing to be redirected. Another thing that I saw was what I would refer to as a mental health clinician is inappropriate affect. So her demeanor did not match her statements.
It's so interesting that you comment on her demeanor, because that was one of the first things I noticed in my own analysis of her interviews. Now, one of the most common retorts that I've read in my own comment section from those defending Nicole Kessinger is that she didn't have to cooperate or speak to law enforcement at all. But that isn't true, because then she would have made herself an obvious suspect. So, based on her inappropriate affect and her demeanor, would that have caused you to want to then start the process of verifying all of her statements to ensure that she was in fact telling the truth?
A couple responses for that. First off, she would have been a person of interest for me because of her relationship with Chris and her ways in which she was answering questions. The second part I'd say is that when I train new investigators, we look to build a case that stands on its own without a confession, because confessions can be lost on appeal or different ways where maybe Miranda becomes an issue. So for me, it's always building a solid case without that confession. And the only way to do that is to chase down all the loose ends. And with Nicole, there's obviously a lot of loose ends there that should have been, cleaned up.
So she should have been treated as a person of interest from the beginning, especially in light of the fact that she deleted all traces of Chris Watts from her cell phone. And speaking of Nicole's cell phone, the discovery evidence obtained from law enforcement stated that they did not have the technology needed to extract all of Nicole's data from her iPhone. So based on your knowledge of law enforcement's available technology in 2018 to the present, is it still possible to retrieve the data she deleted from her cell phone?
Two parts to that one. I'm going to disagree with the law enforcement assessment on that, because although they may not have had the technology, there are different levels. So we have the local police and or sheriff department. We have the state police, and then we have the federal police, so the FBI. There's multiple agencies that could have gone through and done a phone dump for analysis. Plus, there are search warrants that could have been done, depending on who her provider is, that could have basically made a clone phone and have all the evidence without physically having the phone. And, I'm going to say if it's still in evidence, there's still a good chance that, it can still be retrieved from the actual physical phone. And there could be other detections on it for maybe some hidden vaults, such as communication apps and things like that.
Wow, that's incredible. So not only is it possible to retrieve all of her deleted data, but it's been possible this entire time, which everyone has always suspected, but we've all been told by the DA that we are just junior detectives who wrongly think we know better. So to hear from someone who actually knows better that law enforcement responsible for this case dropped the ball is incredibly reaffirming to so many thousands of people who have taken interest in this case. Detective Frey, what else did you notice in your observations of Nicole's interviews that stood out to you?
So, Edward, what we're looking at is the homicide of 4 people. If we look at what should be a person's appropriate demeanor when being questioned about 4 murders. It should not be joyful and giddy and with flirtatious eyes towards the investigator. Even if this was a stranger, there still should be some amount of respect for the fact that 4 people were killed.
I simply could not agree with you more. Nicole's affect and demeanor during these interviews with law enforcement are the epitome of inappropriate, suspicious, and the very reason why so many people initially began to suspect her involvement. And I want to thank Detective Frey for his willingness to come forward and speak on these issues that has affected the lives of millions of people all across the world. His words are reaffirming and powerful and speak to the heart of this entire case.
YouTube channel Behind Criminal Minds, with their impressive deep dives, stumbled upon information that has been pretty much sitting out in the open for about 10 months now on a podcast channel. And what they were able to put together ruffled a few feathers, to say the least. Cell phone records, internet searches, and the neighbor's security camera with footage of a silhouette that matches Nicole's body type. Nicole's lies should have brought her under the scope and scrutiny of the investigation. How and why the Watts case was swept under the rug after Chris confessed. We first need to look back into a previous high-profile case prosecuted by D.A. Rourke. Behind Criminal Minds uncovers how the 29-year-old John Sandoval case may have had an effect on the way the Watts case was handled. D.A. Rourke speaks on 2 specific cases that he describes as having caused him and his staff vicarious trauma, and the very first case he discusses is the homicide of Christina Tournay. D.A. Rourke proceeds to say in his interview, "In about 2009, I got a call from Detective Mike Prill from the Greeley Police Department, who is one of my very good friends and the best investigator on the planet, and he used the name John Sandoval for the first time. And he said, 'Are you aware that our department is looking at the Sandoval case again? And we want you to take a look at it.' And I didn't really know what he was talking about. 5 years that I've been in the office, I hadn't really heard about this case. John and Tina were a married couple going through a divorce. John asked Tina to stop at his house to go over tax papers, and she was never seen again. Naturally, suspicion fell on John, as he had the motive as a bitter ex-abusive husband. But with no body, no crime scene, no witnesses, no confession, police had their hands tied, and although the obvious, the case went cold for 22 years, as Sandoval never admitted to the crime. D.A. Rourke tried the case solely on circumstantial evidence, but his conviction was then overturned after an appeals court found a procedural error in the trial. As prosecutors set to retry the case, Sandoval asked to make a deal. In return to pleading guilty to lesser charges, Sandoval led investigators to Tina's body 22 years after he buried her under a grave at the Greeley Cemetery. Because of this plea deal, Sandoval will be released on October 16, 2029.
Who tended to our family with everything from Kleenex to updates to simply offering an empathetic smile. We want the Greeley Police Department and the Weld County District Attorney's Office to know that we appreciate your never giving up.
Tina Tournay disappeared on October 19th of 1995 after meeting with her estranged husband, John Sandoval, to talk about financial affairs that were ongoing through their pending divorce. She was never heard from again. And for 22 years, her family has had to live with that painful question, where is Tina? I am very pleased to announce that this afternoon, as the result of a plea agreement that was formalized with the defendant in Weld County District Court, that Tina's remains have been located. She has been returned to her family, and hopefully she may now rest in peace.
Behind Criminal Minds uncovered some enraging information about the Sandoval case via podcast, Survivor's Guide to True Crime, Episode 11. During the podcast, Rourke touched on the Sandoval case, revealing in his words, "So let me put what I'm about to describe into context. As part of our investigation leading up to trial, we knew that law enforcement at the Greeley Police Department had looked at the possibility that Sandoval may have secreted her remains in a local cemetery. As part of our investigation leading up to trial, this was back in maybe the early 2000s, with the advent of a local group called NecroSearch, who's responsible for, or who are a group of volunteers of all different specialties who go out and try to find clandestine grave sites. They volunteer their time, they volunteer their equipment, they come in and testify when necessary. But they had looked at the possibility that Sandoval had buried or hid Tina's remains in a local cemetery. They went so far as to know through their investigation that the night Tina disappeared, there were 3 open graves that had been dug for funerals in the day or two after her disappearance. We also knew from that investigation that if there was a morning burial, so we're talking about the morning of October 20th, 1995, the afternoon and evening of the 19th, the grave would have been dug, and they would have put at the bottom of the grave a concrete pad that ultimately the casket would be lowered onto, meaning the Greeley Police Department already knew where to find Christina Tournay, and if they had just did the search, they may have never had to offer Sandoval a plea deal, giving him light at the end of the tunnel to potentially victimize someone else when he is released. So we knew what 3 graves were open. Detectives already knew Tina was buried under one of 3 grave sites for over 10 years and never looked into it, and gave Sandoval a plea deal for information they already knew. Why wouldn't they follow up and delve into the investigation that NecroSearch had laid out for them? The Sandoval case was one of the first of its kind, as it went to trial with no confession, no weapon, no crime scene, no forensic evidence, and no remains. Obviously, the circumstantial evidence was strong for them to decide to go ahead and try the case. But again, why not go check out the grave sites? NecroSearch is a volunteer group and wouldn't have cost the state a dime. In his wife's podcast, Rourke states, "I found out the hard way. Bella and Celeste were, like I said, 3- and 4-year-old little girls with very long glowing blonde hair who liked to run around the living room, dance, sing, and do cartwheels. We knew that because we had some social media posts that Shanann had put on her Facebook page or her Instagram, one of them, so I watched those." Wife Kimberly, in her podcast, Survivor's Guide to True Crime, asked the question, "So what I heard you say is that you really become emotionally and personally involved in this case. And I know I worked in law enforcement. One of the things that we are often told is that you can't get emotionally involved in these cases because honestly, if you do, it just drags you down and you wouldn't make it. But what I have experienced and what I have heard you say, that it seems like you have experienced the cases in which you tend to inadvertently get the most emotionally involved in, they become personal. They also open you up to the most trauma." Rourke responds, "Sure." In the analysis of the video from Behind Criminal Minds, titled "Chris Watts, A Deal with the Devil in Search of Justice," he goes on to say that DA Rourke gets deeply and emotionally involved, and that as a representative of law enforcement, one of the first things they learn is to not become emotionally involved to the outcome of a case because these same emotions can blind you from doing your job. He also says in his video that closely attached to emotions is our ego, and sometimes one of the hardest things we can do as humans is admitting when we are wrong. He would rather close out a case and put it behind him rather than admit that he made a mistake or admit he was wrong. D.A. Rourke has a history of getting emotionally involved with cases. This could very well be why Nicole Kessinger was never investigated. Rather than to implicate Nicole and give Chris a fair trial, he would rather take the guaranteed conviction and let Nicole walk than to have to admit that mistakes were made. The channel goes on to reveal D.A. Rourke's egotistical response that has provided to anyone who has ever questioned his investigation of Nicole Kessinger, or lack thereof, it's as though he genuinely believes that anyone who questions him is nothing more than an ignorant bystander advocating for a witch hunt. A Deal with the Devil reveals how the Rusiks were not opposed to the death penalty, when in fact it was more of a split or undecided, with Sandy firmly wanting Chris to die, and Frank leaning more towards life with no parole. D.A. Rourke stated, "My chief deputy and I flew to North Carolina to talk to them about the process and went to Shanann's parents' house to sit down with them in their living room, what they wanted to see happen, the realities of the death penalty litigations in Colorado. And that's just not something you can have a conversation over the phone about. Ultimately, the outcome of that was a split. I mean, one parent wanted the death penalty, the other, Shanann's father, wanted to make sure that this defendant never saw the light of day, and ultimately he did plead guilty to everything we charged him with, in exchange for not seeking the death penalty." D.A. Rourke explained to the Rusiks why seeking the death penalty may have been a waste of time with the governor's political views.
Thank you for this moment.
I can just have you just identify yourself for the record.
My name is Sandra Rusak, Shannon's mother.
Thank you.
I wanted to say thank you for this moment. I want to take a moment to thank everyone who has prayed for our beloved family, who had sent gifts, cards to us from all over the world. I know God will put the evil people where they need to be. I also want to take the time to thank the town of Frederick, Greeley, FBI, the DA's office, the CBI, for exceptional work. We thank Nicole Atkinson, Shannon's neighbor Nathan, and his family. To me, they're our heroes. They really are. God bless. God makes no mistakes on who He puts in your life. Marriage is about love, trust, and friendship and unity. We marry for sickness and health, to death do us part. Our daughter Shannon loved you with all of her heart. Your children loved you to the moon and back. Shannon's family was her world. Shannon put a crown on your head. But unfortunately, the day that you took their life, God removed that crown. We loved you like a son. We trusted you. Your faithful wife trusted you. Your children adored you, and they also trusted you. Your daughter Bella Marie sang a song proudly. I don't know if you got to see it, but it was, "Daddy, you're my hero." I have no idea who gave you the right to take their lives. But I know God and His mighty angels were there at that moment to bring them home to paradise. God gives us free will. So not only did you take the family of four, your family of four, you took your own life. I want the world to know that our daughter and her children were so loved by us. They will always be protected by God and His mighty angels. I didn't want death for you because that's not my right. Your life is between you and God now, and I pray that He has mercy for you. From Shannon's mother, Bella Marie, Celeste Catherine, and Nico Lee's Nana. Thank you, Your Honor.
Survivor's Guide to True Crime co-host and wife Kimberly asked the question to hubby and DA of Weld County, Michael J. Rourke, "Do you listen to true crime podcasts?" And his response was, "I do not," as she giggles in the background. In all seriousness, I don't, and Kim knows the answer to this. I don't come home and read true crime books. I don't come home and read fictional stories about crime or those kinds of things, but the other reason I don't know from a prosecutor's standpoint if the true crime story that's being put out has been authorized by the victim or if the victim has participated in it. And if it hasn't, I'm not going to consume that out of respect for the victim and his or her choices. And yeah, I'm just not going to do it, because I'm not going to allow someone to monetize a victim's suffering for my own entertainment value. Now, A Deal with the Devil really answered a ton of questions on this topic as to NK. It's very unfortunate the video was taken down when it was fairly used. There was so much more detail and information in that video that I just could not fit into mine. If we don't want an opinion about our content, then do not make it public. When we put ourselves out there, we need to understand that not everyone will agree or see things the way we do. We can't get mad and start copyright striking channels when they were within their rights to review and assess the information. The podcast threw shame on true crime creators for simply asking more questions. Nobody's trying to play junior detective. The public simply wanted answers on how someone so close to a quadruple murderer could walk away after lying, obstructing, and hiding. Edward's channel, Behind Criminal Minds, is one of the more reputable channels on YouTube. Every one of his videos is a deep dive. I'm sure we can all tell and agree a lot goes into his videos. He is a major advocate for justice and empathetic towards victims. I know how much time and effort goes into making a quality video, and it's BS that Edward was forced to take it down. We need to come together for creators like Edward, who was willing to go that extra mile to get the answers for us.